Albert Einstein, a historical figure, was born in the city of Ulm, situated in the southern region of the German Empire, on March 14, 1879. In the late 19th century, Ulm was a significant urban hub within the Kingdom of Württemberg, which constituted a substantial component of the German state. Hermann Einstein, his father, was an Ashkenazi Jew originally from Buchai, Württemberg. When Hermann was a child, he excelled academically and demonstrated remarkable prowess in the domain of applied mathematics while attending school in Stuttgart, the administrative center of Württemberg. In the 1870s, however, Einstein was compelled to forego his studies in order to work in the feather bed store owned and operated by his cousins Moses and Hermann Levi in Ulm, due to the impoverished financial situation of his family. Pauline Koch, the mother of Albert, belonged to a lineage of German Jews renowned for their substantial business and distribution networks in Württemberg. Albert, born of her 1876 matrimonial union with Hermann Einstein, was their firstborn. 2 years later, in 1881, Major or Maria Einstein, the couple's daughter, was born. Albert's formative years were significantly influenced by the commercial dealings of his father. During his infancy, Hermann Einstein made the strategic decision to relocate his family to Munich, the most populous city in southern Germany, situated approximately 170 kilometers east of Ulm, on the business council of his brother Jakob. During the year 1880, Jakob and Hermann were in Munich with the intention of founding Einstein and Company, an electrical engineering firm, just as the great electrification era prepared to sweep across the Western Hemisphere. Albert attended a Catholic elementary school in that location until 1887, when he was transferred to the Leipold Gymnasium in Munich. Albert continued to reside in that location until 1894. However, the Einstein family was once again disrupted in 1894, when Hermann and Jakob were unable to obtain a contract to initiate the electrification of Munich. Instead, they traveled north to Pavia after initially establishing themselves in Milan. After several months of remaining in Munich to further his education, Albert became disillusioned with the gymnasium's rigid rote learning and persuaded his parents and the school administration to allow him to join them in Italy. Albert pursued further academic endeavors in Italy beginning in 1894. Although he was already exhibiting clear indications of an early aptitude as a mathematician and scientist, his father preferred that he develop a stronger fascination with applied engineering and thus follow in the family business. During the summer of 1891, he engaged in self-study of algebra and advanced geometry under the guidance of Euclid, an ancient Greek mathematician based in Munich. The Einsteins hired a family tutor named Max Talmud, who specialized in ophthalmology and optometry, to instruct young Albert in advanced mathematics and scientific principles. However, Talmud quickly realized that Albert was acquiring a greater understanding of subjects like calculus, algebra, and geometry than he did. Neither was he a prodigy whose singular interest centered on mathematics and science. During his adolescence, he also engaged in extensive reading of seminal philosophical works from the 18th and 19th centuries, most notably Immanuel Kant, a German Enlightenment philosopher. First published in 1781, Kant's Critique of Pure Reason contains one of the most analytical discussions of metaphysics, the study of the nature of reality. Despite being one of the most dense philosophical tracts ever composed, Albert appeared to comprehend it clearly at the age of 14, which perplexed his tutor. The aptitudes of young Albert Einstein were duly recognized by his educators, mentor, and guardians. Thus, shortly after his arrival in Pavia and after his 16th birthday, he was instructed to sit for the entrance examinations to the Swiss Federal Polytechnic School, an advanced institution of science, mathematics, and engineering, located in the city of Zurich. Despite achieving high scores on the technical examinations, Albert was not granted admission at this juncture, due in part to his immaturity. The subsequent year, he achieved success on the Swiss Matura, an equivalency examination designed to grant Swiss citizens the opportunity to complete the secondary education curriculum despite not having completed formal schooling in the country. Additionally, He renounced his German citizenship earlier that year in order to avoid conscription for the mandatory military service that was mandatory for all young males in the nation. Thus, in the autumn of 1896, at the age of 17, he ultimately matriculated at the Polytechnic School in Zurich despite being stateless. He intended to pursue his studies in physics and mathematics, two disciplines in which he had consistently displayed exceptional aptitude since his youth. After a duration of 4 years, he ultimately obtained a diploma in the year 1900. During his time in Zurich, Albert Einstein developed his research interests into a mature state. An individual who could be classified broadly as a physicist, but whose field of expertise encompassed a vast array of subjects, including the development of a precise method for measuring the dimensions of microscopic molecules, a domain associated with quantum mechanics, the expansive science concerned with describing the physical properties of matter at the atomic and subatomic scales, became an eclectic scientist. Furthermore, he was intrigued by the quantification of light's motion. During the early 1900s, in Zurich, where he was commencing complex research on this subject, the prevailing belief among North American and European scientists was that light traveled exclusively in wave-like patterns. Einstein, for reasons that would become evident in the years that followed, had skepticism regarding this theory and believed that the mechanism by which light traveled contained an additional layer of complexity. While in his mid-20s, Einstein devoted much of his research to these and other facets of advanced physics. They comprised the foundation of his doctoral dissertation, a new determination of molecular dimensions, which he completed in Zurich in 1905 after researching them part-time throughout the early 1900s. Evidently, Mileva Marić, a young Serbian physicist and mathematician who enrolled at the Polytechnic School in Zurich around the same period that Einstein was granted his first teaching hours there in 1899, assisted him in his early 1900s research. At the time, Marić was one of only 2 female pupils enrolled there. She and Einstein quickly developed a romantic attachment, and while the precise extent of her contribution to his research remains uncertain, it is now postulated that she played a role in his investigations. In any case, her personal inquiry was halted when she became pregnant in the summer of 1901. At the time, Marić and Einstein were not married, and it was still considered a social scandal to have a child outside of matrimony. Mileva seemingly returned to her country of origin, Serbia, in order to give birth to the child, whom they referred to as Liesel in their postpartum correspondence. What transpired after that remains unknown. While certain sources posit that she passed away in 1903 from scarlet fever, others argue that she may have been placed for adoption in Serbia. Her demise appears more probable given that Marić and Einstein exchanged vows in January 1903. 2 more children were born to them. Hans Albert, a boy, was born in the summer of 1904, and Eduard, a son, was born in 1910. It is worth noting that Albert encountered initial difficulty in securing a teaching position after earning his diploma in Zurich in 1900, which may appear anomalous in retrospect. During the subsequent year and a half, he made fruitless efforts to secure a research and junior-level lecturing position at a university in Central Europe. During this period, he obtained Swiss citizenship in 1901, effectively attaining statehood after a nominal lack of national affiliation for the previous 5 years and a half. Max Grossmann, a family acquaintance and associate from the Zurich Polytechnic who had obtained Swiss citizenship, enlisted his father's assistance in securing Einstein a position at the Swiss Patent Office in the capital Bern. Einstein was employed as a patent assistant examiner at this location. In essence, this meant that Albert was entrusted with the responsibility of evaluating the merits of numerous inventions and devices submitted to the Patent Office by individuals seeking recognition of their intellectual property rights over the device so that they could receive financial compensation and acknowledgement. There, Einstein was employed for the following several years. In addition to providing for his young family, Einstein's professional endeavors centered around diverse devices that utilized principles of electrical conduction and mechanics. This may have had an influence on his early research, according to some theories. The meteoric rise of Albert Einstein from near-total scientific obscurity in the scientific community of the developed world to prominence among Europe's foremost physicists in the mid-1900s is one of the most peculiar tales in the annals of scientific history. During the initial half of the 20th century, Albert Einstein concurrently pursued a doctoral degree and held a position at the patent office in Bern. Concurrently, he authored a sequence of papers intended for publication in Annalen der Physik, a renowned German academic journal dedicated to the study of physics and one of the preeminent in its field, established in 1799. In the end, this led to the publication of 4 distinct research papers in the journal in the year 1905. Each of them made significant contributions to distinct areas of the study of physics. As a whole, they have been considered to have brought about a significant transformation in how humanity perceives the atomic and molecular aspects of the natural world and the advancement of contemporary physics. As a result, historians of Western science and biographers of Albert Einstein commonly designate 1905 as the annus mirabilis, or miracle year, of his lifetime. On a heuristic viewpoint concerning the production and transformation of light, was the title of the first of Einstein's 4 papers published in 1905. It was released on June 9. This provided the first explanation of the phenomenon now called the photoelectric effect. When a substance or material is struck by electromagnetic radiation, such as light, electrons are emitted via the photoelectric effect. Photoelectrons are the term used to refer to the electrons that are emitted during this process. The prevailing belief among physicists prior to Einstein's description of the photoelectric effect in 1905 was that light traveled similarly to an ocean wave. However, Einstein explained that light also traveled in what he termed a finite number of energy quanta, which could only be absorbed or generated as entities and moved without dividing. This not only resolved numerous unresolved inquiries regarding the characteristics of light and electrons, but also had profound ramifications for comprehending how light of a specific frequency could impart adequate energy to facilitate the liberation of an electron. This expanded upon the research undertaken by physicists, including Max Planck in prior years. However, Einstein's paper introduced substantial novel insights regarding the interplay between light and energy via the photoelectric effect. This finding received significant recognition in the field of practical applied physics and was explicitly referenced when Einstein was bestowed with the Nobel Prize in Physics many years later. However, physicists did not completely accept his conclusions until the mid-1920s. On July 18, 1905, Annalen der Physik published Einstein's second paper of 1905, titled, On the Motion of Small Particles Suspended in a Stationary Liquid, as required by the molecular kinetic theory of heat, just 6 weeks after the initial publication. Before the publication of Einstein's paper, precise methods for quantifying the size of molecules were non-existent. However, during the 19th century, a number of scientists, including John Dalton, observed that chemical substances tended to combine or degrade in proportional weights, indicating the existence of an unidentified physical molecule that underpinned all substances. At the time of Einstein, these unitary molecules were referred to as atoms. Atom was a term that ancient Greek philosophers of the 6th century BC, who were also attempting to comprehend the essence of existence, had coined. The second paper, published by Albert Einstein in 1905, demonstrated a more comprehensive method for measuring these atoms through the use of Brownian motion. This involved suspending particles, in this case pollen, in a water solution. In conjunction with a supporting investigation conducted by the French physicist Jean Perrin in 1908, Einstein's paper unequivocally established that atoms and molecules were tangible entities that served as the fundamental components of existence. Therefore, the establishment of atomic theory as the foundation for a significant portion of 20th century physics and the acknowledgement of the existence of atoms and molecules by humanity were largely attributable to this second paper from 1905. On September 26, 1905, just over 2 months later, Einstein's third paper was published. This paper, titled, On the Electrodynamics of Moving Bodies, examined the matter of special relativity in depth. This endeavored to reconcile an equation concerning electricity and magnetism that James Clerk Maxwell, a Scottish physicist and mathematician, had formulated in the early 1860s. The formulation of Maxwell's equations presented challenges for physicists attempting to comprehend mechanics that transpired in the vicinity of the speed of light. In his 1905 paper, Einstein proposed his special theory of relativity, or special relativity, as a solution to this dilemma. This stated that the speed of light remains constant for all observers, irrespective of the light source's motion or the observer's position. This contradicted the theory proposed by Isaac Newton more than 2 centuries prior, which stated that the speed of light is not constant. Furthermore, Einstein's special theory of relativity accurately postulated that in situations involving light and 2 objects, it is impossible to ascertain with absolute certainty which one is in motion and which is stationary. Early in the summer of 1905, while riding a streetcar in Bern and gazing at the city's central clock tower, Einstein arrived at this conclusion. It came to his attention that should his vehicle abruptly commence motion at the speed of light, the clock arms on the tower would appear to have stopped, while the timepiece within the streetcar would continue to orbit as if nothing had transpired. This was due to the fact that both Einstein and the timepiece in the streetcar were moving at the same velocity. As a result, the velocity of motion was relative. The clock tower would not have appeared to have stopped if the streetcar had abruptly accelerated to the speed of light. Rather, it would have appeared to have done so in relation to the speed at which the streetcar was presently moving. This was the application of the special theory of relativity. The 21st of November saw the publication of Einstein's 4th and final Annus Mirabilis paper, titled, "Does the Inertia of a Body Depend on its Energy Context?" Although the title may be unfamiliar to some, the equation that Einstein first proposed in the paper, E equals mc2, is widely recognized. To succinctly put, this indicates that the energy of a stationary body, denoted as E, is equivalent to the square root of its mass, or m, times the speed of light, or c in the equation. The equivalency equation demonstrated that a massive particle exhibits a separate form of energy, referred to as rest energy, from its kinetic energy. This phenomenon, which later became referred to as the mass-energy equivalence, illustrates how the rest energy of a particle, such as the atomic nucleus, could be so enormous that a sufficient disturbance would cause the particle to emit an enormous quantity of thermal and light energy. Later decades would witness the disastrous practical application of this equation, and Einstein came to regret this aspect of his research as time passed. The 4 papers authored by Albert Einstein and published in 1905 represented more than mere advancements within the restricted domain of academic theoretical physics. In the decades that followed, the practical implementation of science was significantly influenced by his research. For example, if you approach an automated door today and it opens in anticipation of your movement, this is due to the fact that the sensors employed in the doorway respond to obstructions in the light beams emitted by the doorway, a moving person in this case being such an obstacle. The door is then instructed to open by the sensor. Einstein initially defined the operation of particles. Other innovations that resulted from his research on light included solar-powered calculators and streetlights that activate autonomously during nighttime. Over time, the special theory of relativity contributed to the evolution of global positioning systems, or GPS. Thus, when you activate Google Maps, it operates effectively, in part, on the basis of research published in Einstein's Annus Mirabilis papers. Furthermore, the utilization of the energy contained within the atomic nucleus by nuclear power plants to generate enormous quantities of power is grounded in Einstein's principles of energy and mass equivalence, as elucidated in the equation E equals mc2. The 1905 publication of Albert Einstein's revolutionary research results rapidly captured the interest of the European scientific community. However, due to the prevailing reliance on word-of-mouth and physical journal circulation to disseminate research information, it took several years before the significance of his findings became widely recognized throughout Europe. He experienced a career transformation as a result. By 1908, he had secured a teaching position at the University of Bern, which enabled him to resign from his role at the patent office. He was appointed to a newly established chair of theoretical physics at the University of Zurich the subsequent year. There, he remained for the subsequent 2 years. Aside from devising the theory of general relativity, as an offshoot of his work on special relativity, he continued to refine some of the points he had made in his 1905 papers during this period. According to the theory of general relativity, the discernible gravitational attraction between two masses is the consequence of their respective masses warping space and time. Significant preliminary scientific advancements were achieved with regard to black holes and other massive entities present in the cosmos. After more than 15 years in Switzerland, Einstein departed in 1911 to accept a new position at the Charles Ferdinand University in Prague, the oldest university in what is now Czechia, but was a constituent state of the Austro-Hungarian Empire at the time. Simultaneously, he was granted Austrian citizenship. More than a dozen papers were published during his tenure of slightly more than a year, covering subjects including the mathematics of radiation, quantum theory, and gravitation. A new offer eventually compelled him to return to Switzerland. This was an invitation to teach at the Polytechnic School in Zurich, his alma mater. He arrived in that location by the summer of 1912 and proceeded to spend the subsequent year conducting research on gravitation and molecular heat while delivering lectures to classes that grew increasingly acquainted with the burgeoning reputation of the German physicist. A substantial portion of the aforementioned work was executed in collaboration with Marcel Grossmann, a Swiss colleague who had been Einstein's fellow student at the Polytechnic in the late 1890s. Grossmann's family had provided financial support during Einstein's tenure at the Bern Patent Office. In the spring of 1913, less than a year after assuming his position in Zurich, two of the most eminent scientists of the time, Max Planck and Walter Nernst, paid Einstein a visit in Switzerland. Both individuals were employed in Berlin and had traveled to Zurich with the intention of persuading Einstein to accept a position at the University of Berlin in his native country. Automatic membership in the Prussian Academy of Sciences and the position of director of the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute for Physics accompanied the appointment to the position. This would enable Einstein to focus on his research and assemble a group of scientists around him. The proposition became even more enticing to him due to the possibility of spending more time with his cousin Elsa, who resided in Germany and with whom Einstein had established regular correspondence since the spring of 1912. Early in 1914, Albert therefore relocated to the capital of Germany. His first wife, Mileva, initially consented to the move with their 2 sons. However, she quickly grew dissatisfied in Berlin and discerned that Albert was becoming closer to his cousin. Consequently, she and the children returned to Zurich. They remained estranged until their divorce in 1919, following which Albert Einstein entered into matrimony with Elsa. At that time, both Elsa and Albert were in their 40s, and Albert's second marriage to Einstein did not produce any additional children. However, Elsa's 2 daughters from her previous marriage were adopted by Albert as stepchildren. The commencement of the First World War promptly halted Einstein's arrival in Berlin. Tensions had been escalating between the main European powers for years over disparate matters, including the void left by the Ottoman Empire's collapse in the Balkans, colonial rivalry in Africa, and the naval race between Britain and Germany. In the summer of 1914, these factors converged to form the basis of a pan-European war that rapidly expanded into a global conflict. A document entitled Manifesto of the 93, and addressed to the civilized world, was rapidly disseminated in Germany following its outbreak and Germany's invasion of neutral Belgium to launch a swift attack against northeastern France, which drew widespread international condemnation. The endeavor was spearheaded by notable individuals such as Adolf van Baeyer, who was awarded the Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 1905, and Paul Ehrlich, who received the Nobel Prize in Medicine in 1908 for his groundbreaking contributions to chemotherapy. In essence, it constituted a letter of support from dozens of distinguished German academics for Germany's war effort. Einstein, an enduring pacifist throughout his life, declined to affix his signature and instead formulated the Manifesto to the Europeans in collaboration with a trio of German academicians. This articulated the notion that the swift cessation of the conflict could be achieved by capitalizing on Europe's shared cultural sensibility. Regrettably, their aspirations came to nothing, and the conflict persisted for an additional 4 years of ceaseless hostilities, succeeded by years of revolution and civil strife throughout a significant portion of the continent. In spite of the protracted conflict, Einstein was capable of initiating systematic research in Berlin starting in 1915, as the initial profound impact of the war's outbreak subsided. Nevertheless, the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute was not formally founded in Berlin under the leadership of Albert Einstein until 1917. Due to administrative and financial setbacks caused by the war effort, its inception was delayed. He would assume the role of institute director for the subsequent 16 years. Concurrently, he was granted membership in the German Physical Society in 1916. Founded in 1845, the organization is the oldest preeminent academic organization of physicists in the world. Membership in the Royal Netherlands Academy of Arts and Sciences in 1920 and admission as a foreign member to the Royal Society in 1921, arguably the most prestigious scientific organization in the world and one that was founded in London in 1660, were among the foreign honors that would be bestowed in the years to come. Despite these accolades, Einstein persisted in pioneering novel directions with his research during the mid-1910s. As an example, he postulated the existence of gravitational waves in 1916, which are essentially disturbances in the space-time curvature. These were undetectable with the instrumentation available in the early 20th century. However, American scientists eventually confirmed their existence in 2016, 100 years after Einstein first postulated their existence. Additionally, he initiated theorizing regarding the presence of black holes, which are currently understood to be regions in space characterized by gravitational forces so intense that light and particles are unable to escape them effectively and cause space and time to be distorted. Similar to his other groundbreaking contributions, his research on black holes served as a foundation for numerous subsequent theories that detailed the fundamental components of the universe in the late 20th century. However, he too could have been misinformed. He initiated research on the cosmological constant in 1917, a theory that postulated the permanence of the universe. Einstein regarded the discovery of the recession of nebulae in the cosmos by American astronomer Edwin Hubble many years later as the realization that his earlier theory of the cosmological constant was incorrect. He described this realization as his biggest blunder of his career. However, his other significant research endeavor during the war years was anything but a failure. Special relativity was the topic of one of Einstein's renowned papers from 1905, which dealt with the theory he had been developing for more than a decade prior to that time. However, he did not commence the final stages of his investigation on the subject of general relativity until the mid-1910s. The geometric theory of gravitation was delineated in the general theory of relativity. This transcended Newtonian conceptions of gravity in its attempt to elucidate gravitational attraction and the intricate nature of geometric gravity in its application to the entire universe, not limited to individual planets. The question of who first formulated the general theory of relativity remains unresolved, as David Hilbert, a German mathematician and contemporary of Albert Einstein, arrived at conclusions that were virtually identical to his own in the mid-1910s. Similar to the concurrent development of the theory of natural selection by Charles Darwin and Alfred Russel Wallace in the mid-19th century, communication existed between Einstein and Hilbert. In 1915, Einstein paid a visit to the University of Göttingen, where Hilbert was employed, to deliver lectures pertaining to his own discoveries. It appears reasonably certain that Einstein and Hilbert were sufficiently influenced by one another in the winter of 1915 for them to reach identical conclusions regarding general relativity within days of one another. Late in 1918, Europe and the rest of the world began to recover from the ravages of the First World War. However, certain nations, including Russia, Hungary, Turkey, and Ireland, were plunged into bitter civil wars at the conclusion of the conflict, which surpassed anything these countries had witnessed during the war itself. However, as routine activities gradually resumed, academic discourse fully resumed and research dissemination recommenced on a broad scale. Therefore, among the physicists of Europe and America, the general theory of relativity contributions of Einstein and Hilbert were disseminated to a more extensive audience. The recognition of the revolutionary nature of their research grew as time passed. Subsequently, during a solar eclipse in the summer of 1919, Sir Arthur Eddington, an English astronomer and mathematician, verified the accuracy of the theory. This time, the story was picked up by the mainstream press, which reported that Albert Einstein's theory had demolished Isaac Newton's model of the universe, which had been devised approximately 250 years prior. In light of the foregoing, it is conceivable that the Nobel Foundation in Stockholm's decision to bestow the Nobel Prize in Physics upon Einstein in 1921 was not entirely unexpected. The award designation specifically referenced his contribution to the discovery of the photoelectric effect in his 1905 paper, but it could have equally been bestowed for a diverse array of research discoveries made within the preceding 15 years. Einstein and Elsa, whom he had recently wedded, made the decision to embark on an international journey subsequent to the 1920s economic prosperity and the post-World War II era of social unrest and the acceptance of the Nobel Prize in 1921. When they arrived in New York City by ship in early April 1921, the mayor, John Francis Hylan, and a delegation of the city's most prominent Jewish community members greeted the couple. Thereafter, receptions and lectures continued for weeks, most notably at Princeton University in New Jersey and Columbia University in New York. In the White House later that month, Einstein conferred with President Warren Harding. They subsequently embarked on a voyage across the Pacific Ocean to the Empire of Japan, followed by stops in Singapore and India, before arriving in the Middle East. Einstein embarked on a visit to Palestine, a region that had fallen under British mandate subsequent to the conclusion of the First World War. In this region, the Jewish Zionist movement endeavored to found a unified state for the world's Jews, who had been dispersed for centuries. Following that, he returned to Germany. However, the journey from 1921 to 1922 marked the inception of a series of momentous journeys to various regions across the globe. As an illustration, during his 1925 trip to South America, he spent weeks in Argentina, Uruguay, and Brazil, all of which were experiencing significant economic and social growth at the turn of the 20th century and were highly regarded by scholars. During the mid-1920s, Albert Einstein engaged in a scientific debate that garnered significant media attention during that period. This was a dispute between Niels Bohr, a Danish physicist who had been awarded the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1922, precisely 12 months subsequent to Einstein's receipt of the same distinction. During the mid-1920s, Einstein and Bohr were embroiled in a dispute over their divergent interpretations of quantum theory. Much of this centered on Bohr's incredulity regarding the existence of photons, a concept that Einstein first postulated in 1905. His acceptance of their existence was not achieved until 1925, and even then the disputes persisted regarding additional aspects of their individual perspectives on quantum mechanics. The culmination of a series of debates that took place in London and other locations from 1922 to 1925 was a renowned academic dispute that took place at the Fifth Solvay Conference, which was hosted by the International Solvay Institutes of Physics and Chemistry in Brussels in 1927. In this section, Bohr and Einstein continued their argument, each presenting a point of view that ultimately proved to be correct. Nevertheless, in addition to its theoretical discourse, the conference is remarkable for the assembly of a considerable number of the most distinguished physicists in the world. In addition to Einstein and Bohr, 17 of the 29 attendees had been awarded the Nobel Prize earlier or later. Prominent individuals who were present at that time included Marie Curie, Erwin Schrödinger, and Werner Heisenberg. It demonstrates the absolute grandeur of the scientific community in Europe during the interwar period. Einstein also underwent a re-evaluation of his own hypotheses regarding the universe during the late 1920s. This was in reaction to the revelation of the recession of nebulae, presently referred to as Hubble's law, which was made possible by the American astronomer Edwin Hubble. This indicates that the rate at which galaxies are receding from Earth is proportional to their distance from the Milky Way. Consequentially, the velocity at which a cosmic body departs from Earth increases with its distance from the planet. The revelation of these discoveries in 1929 compelled Einstein to abandon his prevailing theory of the universe at the time, referred to as the cosmological constant, which postulated a largely constant expansion of the universe since the Big Bang. In other words, the constant speed of expansion was assumed to characterize the universe since its inception. The discoveries made by Hubble compelled Einstein to reassess his hypothesis, given the evident acceleration of the universe's expansion. An additional factor influencing Einstein's December 1930 decision to undertake a new expedition to the United States was the discovery made by Hubble. He desired to encounter Hubble in 1931 so that he could express his gratitude for his research. Nevertheless, the journey is primarily renowned for Einstein's sojourn in California, during which he ostensibly sought a 2-month visiting fellowship at the California Institute of Technology, more commonly referred to as Caltech. Throughout this journey, Albert Einstein made a foreboding observation that science possessed the same, if not a greater, potential to cause harm than good in human society. He was presumably alluding to the expanding application of technology in warfare, a subject that the pacifist Einstein abhorred. This aversion to the escalating militarism of the 1930s also contributed to Einstein's friendships with the actor Charlie Chaplin and the novelist Upton Sinclair, both of whom he encountered during his visit to Los Angeles and who openly declared themselves to be pacifists, alike. Due to his developing acquaintance with Chaplin, Einstein was invited to the premiere of Chaplin's City Lights, a groundbreaking silent film that played a pivotal role in popularizing the romantic comedy subgenre in American cinema. Upon Albert and Elsa Einstein's entrance to the theater accompanied by Chaplin, Einstein was greeted with the highest regard befitting a Hollywood icon. Additionally, this marked the start of a long-lasting friendship between Einstein and Chaplin, which culminated in the actor's visit to Einstein's Berlin flat shortly thereafter. Upon his own return to the United States in early 1933, Einstein and Chaplin renewed their acquaintance. Amid his increasing notoriety and achievements during the 1920s and early 1930s, when he was holding positions in Germany and embarking on extensive travel, the political climate in his native Germany was deteriorating. After the First World War, Germany was engulfed in political anarchy. However, starting in 1923, the country entered a period characterized by significant prosperity and instability. That all changed in late 1929, when the Wall Street stock markets in New York City collapsed and the developed world entered a global economic depression. As millions of Germans lost their employment and economic security, a colossal portion of the populace supported the ardently anti-Semitic National Socialist German Workers' Party, or Nazis, led by Adolf Hitler, in national elections. They won the Reichstag elections in 1932, becoming the largest political party in Germany. Hitler was appointed Chancellor of the country in the early months of 1933. The party successfully transformed Germany into a one-party authoritarian state within weeks. This development bore grave concern for the Jewish community in the country, as well as for notable figures such as Albert Einstein. Albert opted to remain in the United States rather than repatriate to Germany. Following a brief sojourn in Antwerp, Belgium, where he presented his German passport to the German embassy and renounced his citizenship, the Einstein family established residence in America. Due to his Jewish heritage, the Nazis had already twice searched his flat in Berlin, and within the following year or so, Jewish academicians, including himself, were expelled from their positions throughout Germany. After resolving to pursue permanent residency in the United States in 1933, Albert Einstein expeditiously obtained employment at the Institute for Advanced Studies, Princeton University, located in New Jersey. Albert Einstein dedicated the majority of his professional life to Princeton, with the exception of a directorship he held at Brandeis University in Massachusetts during the mid-1940s. Throughout his remaining years, he was predominantly associated with Princeton. During the mid to late 1930s, Albert Einstein continued his significant research efforts on the East Coast of the United States. An especially noteworthy involvement ensued from a partnership with Nathan Rosen, an American physicist of Jewish descent. Together, Einstein and Rosen developed a conceptual model of a wormhole. Theoretical structures known as wormholes have the potential to link disparate sites in space and time. During the period in which Einstein and Rosen formulated their hypothetical wormhole bridge, the notion was still in its infancy. However, it has since evolved into a fundamental component of space travel literature. As time progressed, they progressively integrated themselves into science fiction writing beginning in the mid-20th century. During Einstein's 1930s teaching tenure in the United States, developments in his native Germany were taking place that would subsequently have far-reaching global ramifications. After their initial ascent to power in 1933, the Nazis unequivocally declared their intention to reverse the provisions outlined in the Treaty of Versailles, an agreement that had previously concluded the First World War. They began rearming Germany in the mid-1930s by assembling thousands of tanks, fighter aircraft, and bombers and recruiting hundreds of thousands of soldiers into the military. Subsequently, starting in the spring of 1938, the Nazis implemented diplomatic coercion as a means to annex Austria into a Greater Germany and acquired territory from Lithuania and Czechoslovakia, among others. Britain and France declared war on Germany in September 1939, when Hitler invaded Poland, concluding that they could no longer appease the Nazis. During the initial tenure in office, the Franklin Delano Roosevelt administration encountered a lack of public support for American intervention in a European conflict that the United States considered to be unnecessary. Nevertheless, the United States entered the Second World War in December 1941, when the U.S. Pacific Fleet was at rest in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, when the Empire of Japan, an ally of Germany, attacked. It was more than any other conflict in human history that would be influenced by scientific progress. Einstein, notwithstanding his pacifist stance, quickly engaged in correspondence with the United States government regarding the escalating conflict. In fact, this had begun weeks prior to the outbreak of conflict in Europe. Early in 1939, European physicists utilized uranium to discover nuclear fission. The discovery brought the theoretical feasibility of producing a nuclear weapon of some kind one step closer to fruition. Several European physicists, the Hungarian Leo Szilard being the most prominent, comprehended that the development of a nuclear warhead by a devoted research team was now an absolute certainty. Many European scientists were profoundly alarmed by this, as a significant number of the continent's foremost physicists were employed in Germany and could be coerced into assisting the Nazis in the development of a nuclear weapon. Despite the weapon's absolutely cataclysmic potential for human casualties, Hitler and his accomplices would readily employ it as a conventional weapon of war. As a result, Szilard, along with two other Hungarian physicists named Eugene Wigner and Edward Teller, penned a letter to the United States government in which they cautioned against the possibility that the Nazis would develop a nuclear weapon first. This document was dispatched to America, where Einstein affixed his signature prior to its delivery to the Roosevelt administration. The months that followed were significantly influenced by the Einstein-Szilard letter, which prompted the United States to initiate its own nuclear weapons development program. The Manhattan Project, an initiative undertaken by the United States government to produce a nuclear weapon, commenced in stages in late 1939, mere weeks following the reception of the Einstein-Szilard letter. This strongly contradicted Einstein's pacifist principles. However, the potential acquisition of that weapon by the Nazis prior to the United States compelled him to caution the government about the perils involved. Put this aside, He considered all forms of warfare to be a disease that modern civil society as a whole ought to oppose. As a result, he was not involved in the execution of the Manhattan Project. Instead, it was under the leadership of American theoretical physicist Robert Oppenheimer. Although operations were restricted from 1939 to 1941, funding and resources increased dramatically when the United States entered the war in December 1941. This was especially true as it became more evident that the Nazis were indeed attempting to develop super weapons, including a nuclear bomb, at various installations in Europe, most notably in Norway, where heavy water, a form of hydrogen with distinct nuclear properties that could be conceived, was being produced. However, progress in this area was sluggish, and numerous sabotage missions launched by Free Norwegian combatants and British Special Forces thwarted the investigation. At that juncture, the Manhattan Project had accumulated the employment of more than 130,000 individuals in the United States, and as early as 1942, a nuclear reactor had been demonstrated in Chicago. Eventually, the first nuclear device in the world was detonated in the New Mexico desert in mid-July 1945. A few weeks had passed since the conclusion of the Second World War in Europe prior to the detonation of the first nuclear weapon. Nevertheless, due to the consensus among the Allies to postpone the resolution of the Pacific War against the Empire of Japan until after the defeat of Nazi Germany, hostilities persisted in that region through the summer of 1945. As a consequence, the Truman administration expeditiously resolved to employ the novel weapon against Japan, reasoning that doing so would ultimately result in the preservation of more than 1 million lives by compelling Japan to surrender promptly. As a result, the inaugural nuclear weapon employed in combat was detonated on the city of Hiroshima on August 6, 1945. The ensuing radiation sickness caused the deaths of approximately 75,000 individuals on the initial day and an additional 60,000 or so in the months that followed. Nagasaki was devastated by a second nuclear device of a marginally different type, which was detonated 3 days later. As a consequence of the aftereffects and the initial destruction zone, more than 80,000 people perished. Although Japan promptly capitulated, Einstein was profoundly distressed by the magnitude of the assaults and the subsequent devastation they caused. He declared shortly after the bombings, "The time has arrived for humanity to abandon war. Resolving international issues through the use of war is no longer a rational approach." He further conveyed his remorse regarding the potential contribution of his 1905 published research on the molecular structure of the world and the concept of mass energy and equivalence to the advancement of nuclear weapons. Einstein continued to conduct research and publish during the post-war years. However, he was approaching his 70s at the time, and the demands of his public persona and certain health issues limited his productivity. However, during the late 1940s, he conducted research at Princeton where he formulated his unified field theory. His publication of these discoveries appeared in Scientific American in 1950 under the title, On the Generalized Theory of Gravitation. The objective of this unified field theory was to construct a singular, cohesive theoretical structure that could be employed to comprehend the fundamental forces at work in the universe and in nature. Numerous physicists had endeavored to establish a unified theory during the initial half of the 20th century. However, none of their proposals had garnered unanimous approval from the academic community. Albert Einstein's theory sought to integrate aspects of his research from general relativity, electromagnetism, and gravity. It put forth a unified origin for all physical laws, including forces such as gravitation, electromagnetic forces, and the curvature of spacetime, which had occupied a significant portion of Einstein's work during the 1930s. Although neither he nor others were able to succeed in formulating a unified theory through their efforts, his research remains seminal in the advancement of differential geometry, which is the study of the geometry of smooth surfaces and shapes in space. In the years following the conclusion of World War II in the United States, Einstein also achieved a level of mainstream societal fame that was essentially unparalleled for a theoretical physicist. This can be traced back to the early 1920s, when Albert Einstein initially arrived in New York City. While receiving the Nobel Prize, Einstein's theory of relativity had just been validated by other scientists, which altered our fundamental understanding of the universe. In December 1919, an article from the New York Times touted Einstein's research findings as having destroyed space and time, as quotation. Since Charles Darwin's theory of natural selection, which was published half a century earlier, this was the most fundamental shift in human thought. However, Einstein's work was met with jubilation, whereas Darwin's had been considered sacrilegious. In the years that followed, his associations with Hollywood figures such as Charlie Chaplin and his progressively iconic physical aspect made him a more recognizable figure. Significantly, it became evident during the 1940s how Einstein's revolutionary concepts were not only influencing theoretical physics but also exerting practical effects on society and the world. As a consequence of these events, he attained a level of esteem in American society comparable to that of Stephen Hawking in the latter part of the 20th century, or James Lovelock and Richard Dawkins in the early 21st century. By the conclusion of his working life, Einstein had amassed an immense body of written and published work. Although it may appear peculiar to some, Einstein published nearly 300 papers in academic journals over the course of 55 years as his primary academic output, as opposed to novels. This continues to be the principal method of research dissemination among scholars engaged in the hard sciences. Einstein authored more than a dozen books, the majority of which were reproductions of academic papers he had previously published. He did so in an effort to tie together his existing work on general relativity and other subjects, or to simplify the material for a wider readership. Certain volumes of these persisted for decades as advanced undergraduate and postgraduate textbooks in theoretical physics at universities. Furthermore, translations were undertaken into numerous languages, guaranteeing that by the mid-20th century, Einstein's work was comprehensible in dozens of countries. In addition to his scholarly contributions, Einstein maintained an extensive correspondence life. The Albert Einstein Archives, housed at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, contain in excess of 3,500 pages of his personal correspondence spanning the years 1912 to 1955. Furthermore, he authored voluminous works covering a wide range of political, philosophical, religious, and humanitarian topics. It is not surprising that accumulated editions of Einstein's works, correspondence, and other writings, including those published by the academic press of Princeton University, where he spent the majority of his career in the United States, have totaled dozens of lengthy volumes since the late 1980s. Despite his notoriety and intellectual prowess, the person responsible for creating this monumental collection of work was an exceedingly modest individual. He once declared, "I am merely passionately curious. I have no exceptional abilities." Although he never amassed wealth or notoriety, guests to his residence in Berlin during the 1920s or America after 1933 were generally impressed by its modest decor, with the piano serving as the most extravagant embellishment to enable Einstein to perform the classical music he cherished. His family life was, without a doubt, challenging. After their mother and Albert divorced in 1914, his two biological sons relocated to her residence, and their relationship remained somewhat distant thereafter. After Albert departed for the United States in the early 1930s, Edward remained in Europe and, despite maintaining a correspondence with his father, never saw him again. Hans subsequently immigrated to the United States in 1938, where they reconnected. After developing psychiatric issues, Edward was subsequently placed in an institution in Zurich. Long before Elsa's death in New Jersey in 1936, Albert and Elsa's marriage was also tumultuous, and it has been widely speculated that Einstein occasionally turned to his scientific investigations as an outlet for his own emotional frailties. From a political standpoint, he was benevolent, having always been opposed to violence and conflict. Mutually enamored with Mahatma Gandhi's nonviolent resistance against British colonial authority in India, he established a correspondence with the latter. His political stance evolved over time to include a critique of capitalism and support for socialism. Additionally, he expressed his conviction for a global governance system and an end to interstate competition in numerous writings. His perception of the United States was favorable, as he considered the nation to be based on meritocracy. However, prior to his complete relocation from Europe to America in the mid-1950s, the FBI had compiled a dossier on him, which had grown to over 1,400 pages. This was not an out-of-the-ordinary occurrence for an academic in post-war America and a former German. Einstein regarded the Bible as a compilation of primitive legends, and was a self-proclaimed agnostic. However, his Jewish heritage was an intrinsic aspect of his character. In the face of the Nazi menace, his Jewish heritage also influenced his life after the 1930s, when it compelled him to relocate to the United States. In his later years, Einstein also gained recognition for his advocacy of Zionism and the State of Israel. He had previously embarked on a journey to Palestine in the 1920s. During that period it was under British mandate following the conclusion of the First World War. Hundreds of thousands of Jews were already residing in or migrating to the region at that time in an effort to reform a Jewish state that had been dispersed for nearly 2 millennia. Albert Einstein consented in 1925 to serve on the inaugural Board of Governors of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, an institution that had commenced operations the previous year. Then, hundreds of thousands of European Jews who had survived the Holocaust perpetrated by the Nazis during World War II migrated towards the Holy Land in the post-war period. Upon the expiration of the British Mandate in March 1948, the Jewish population in the Levant proclaimed the establishment of a new state known as Israel. Einstein renounced the ceremonial position of president of the country in 1952 due to his advanced age and incapacity to depart from the United States at that juncture. Albert Einstein maintained his endorsement of the Zionist movement until his demise. However, it is puzzling what his pacifist inclination would have thought of the Israeli state during its protracted conflict with its Muslim neighbors, which began with the Suez Crisis of 1956 and continued thereafter. Einstein had passed away prior to Israel's involvement in the Suez Crisis or the Second Arab-Israeli War against its southern neighbor Egypt in 1956. He began to experience symptoms of an abdominal aortic aneurysm, an enlargement of the largest artery in the abdomen, the abdominal aorta, shortly after World War II ended. Like any other component of the circulatory system, it is susceptible to obstruction caused by factors such as smoking, elevated blood pressure, and cholesterol. Early in 1955, when the aorta ruptured and caused internal hemorrhaging, the issue resurfaced despite Einstein's lifestyle improvements, which included adopting a vegetarian diet. The operation to reinforce the aorta wall in 1948 was a successful resolution of the problem. On April 17, he was admitted to the hospital. However, he declined emergency surgery to halt the bleeding, stating that it was more dignified to pass away at one's own pace when the time came. The following day, on April 18, 1955, at the age of 76, he passed away. Despite lacking the consent of Einstein's family, the surgeon who performed his autopsy subsequently extracted his brain for scientific investigation. Following this, it underwent dissection, and its remnants are presently housed in the National Museum of Health and Medicine in Washington, D.C. In 2013, a portion of it was displayed at the Mutter Museum in Philadelphia. One possible explanation for Einstein's extraordinary prowess in solving mathematical equations is the abnormally high quantity of glial cells present in his brain. Following his demise, his remains were cremated in New Jersey, and his ashes were scattering modestly in an unspecified location. Albert Einstein was among the most influential scientists in scientific history. His research, which spanned 50 years, produced results of such magnitude that his surname has come to be associated with exceptional intelligence. One aspect that is notably exceptional is that it all originated from comparatively modest origins. During his teenage and young adult years in the 1890s, he essentially lived as an international nomad, relocating between his native Germany, Italy, and Switzerland as his parents attempted to balance their financial and business situation with their knowledge of their son's precocious abilities as a physicist and mathematician. Despite experiencing a period of stability during his tenure at the Polytechnic School in Zurich, universities in Central Europe declined to employ him upon the completion of his preliminary studies there. As a result, he labored for a number of years at the Swiss Patent Office in Bern. During this time, while evaluating inventions and starting a young family, he initiated some of the most influential research ever conducted in the field of physics. As a consequence, during the Annus Mirabilis of 1905, 4 groundbreaking investigations emerged that fundamentally transformed human comprehension of the universe's essence. These investigations simultaneously unveiled the presence of photons and the fundamental nuclear and atomic components of existence. The year 1905 altered everything. Over the subsequent years, Einstein was consistently elevated to increasingly prestigious academic positions, culminating in his ascension to the pinnacle of European academia in Berlin, coinciding with the outbreak of the First World War. Amidst that disastrous conflict, he laboriously formulated the overarching theory of relativity. His contributions earned him the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1921, although he received additional honors in the decades that followed. But perhaps the most notable aspect of Einstein's career, beginning in the 1920s, was the public persona he established. His travels throughout Europe, the Middle East, the United States, and South America enabled him to advocate for numerous causes. One of his most notable contributions was sounding the alarm regarding the impending danger posed by Nazi Germany beginning in 1933. In fact, upon Hitler's rise to power, he renounced his German citizenship promptly and relocated to the United States. He proceeded to emphasize the perils that could arise from the Nazis' potential acquisition of a nuclear weapon. However, this was a double-edged sword for the pacifist Albert Einstein, as witnessing the United States unleash its own atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945 was the price paid to prevent Nazi Germany from being defeated in the nuclear race. Following the Holocaust, he utilized his position to advocate for the Jewish people in the Middle East on behalf of a state in the post-war period. At the time of his death in 1955, he was the preeminent scientist globally, exerting a profound influence on the modern disciplines of physics, mathematics, and cosmology. The course of history in the 20th century could have been considerably altered in the absence of Albert Einstein. In your opinion, what is Albert Einstein? Did he rank as the most revolutionary thinker in the annals of modernity? And if so, what could account for his extraordinary intellect? Kindly provide your feedback in the remarks section. Until then, we appreciate your attention.